Hey guys, Chris Wooley here. In one of the Facebook groups, we were talking about photographing for backgrounds, whether it's a digital replacement or getting something printed up from like Background Town or something, a custom background. And I do it just a little bit differently. And I wanted to share with you what I do when I'm creating a custom background. So I am out here in one of our local parks here in Spokane, Washington, and it is springtime. And it's nice because we actually have nice full trees, that outdoor look. And sometimes I want to use those elements inside the studio, like in the winter, or if it's raining, like it's going to be doing here shortly. So I just want to have a nice static background that I can use and throw into images or get printed up as a background, which is what I'm going to do with this shot that we're doing here today. So let's talk about what you need to do when photographing for a background. There's a guy mowing the lawn over there. If you're hearing background noise, that's what it is. So first thing that we're doing is making sure that we've got the right time of day. So it is overcast and it's going to be raining here very, very soon, which is awesome because we have nice cloud coverage. That means that I don't have really, really high specular highlights here, and the contrast between shadows and highlights is pretty low. That means it's going to look beautiful and very low contrast, super natural. If I tried to shoot this on a bright sunny day like at noon, the contrast would just be too much. So make sure you're selecting the right time of day to go out and get these shots. And it could be that you're doing something like a landmark inside your city. We can use these for like families, for seniors, for doing headshots. So we've got a lot of versatility. So we want to make sure that we're getting the most out of these backgrounds that we're going to get printed up. So I picked a nice day that was overcast right before it rains so that I've got that very low contrast lighting. Next thing I'm looking at is coming up with a scene that I want to photograph. So I want to have some depth and a nice natural feel. That way I can shoot in springtime, even in the middle of winter. So I'm going to be using these for like seniors, families, and lots of headshots for me because I do lots of those. And so I've got a nice scene here and I'm looking for something that has some depth. So I've got some foreground elements like this tree. I've got some depth as we go back behind it. And we have kind of a natural vignette that happens inside this image. So that's what I'm looking for, is something that's got some depth and some nice framing that's happening inside of our image. Because we want to be able to put our subject center of it and just have it look beautiful. So when we're looking at the setup, I'm going and shooting this on a tripod. And that's just because I want to make sure that I've got my height down so that I know that I'm at about 5.5 feet, because that's where I normally shoot when I'm holding the camera, is about this height. So I want the background to be from that same perspective. If you're a little bit shorter, feel free to lower that down. If you're going to be doing something where you have people like sitting on the ground, maybe you want to be on the ground shooting up, because we want that angle or that perspective to be the same. I do a lot of stuff either on a tripod like this or handheld. So I'm going to shoot in that 5-ish foot range, and that works really well with what my background is. I'm also looking for something that's fairly flat. I don't want to be shooting uphill or downhill because I don't want that weird perspective inside the background. So I'm up here, I've got this locked in, and I've got some composition. Next thing I'm looking at is the focal length. So how much zoom do we have on it? It's very tempting to go like really, really wide on your lens, so trying to get as much of the scene in as possible. But chances are inside the studio, you're not going to be shooting at 18 or 24 millimeters. That's just too wide. We're going to be zoomed in just a little bit. And so I'm shooting this one at 50 millimeters. So you could use a straight up 50-nifty lens or a variable lens. This is a 24-105 f4. I'm at 50 millimeters on it. And that's going to give me some nice compression inside the image, especially if I'm going to be shooting around 50 millimeters when I'm inside the studio. So I want to try to have that focal length match. You don't have to be 100% exact. So if I'm at 40 millimeters or 35, it's probably still going to look nice. Same with if I'm at 70 or 80 millimeters, probably going to look pretty nice as well. But we want to be pretty close. So I don't want to be at, say, 200 millimeters, zooming in really, really tight, and then shoot something a bit wider. There's just going to be a disconnect, and it's going to look fake or like a composite. And the whole point of this is that we want to make our life easier. So we want everything to line up as nice as possible. So I'm shooting at 50 millimeters so that when I get it printed up and it's in the studio, I can shoot about 50 millimeters and I am going to have a really, really nice looking image. So focal length and our camera height, those are the two big ones that we're looking at. Next is focus. And this is the last little bit of that trifecta on how to get a beautiful shot. We want to make sure that we don't have the entire scene in focus. And this is something that I've learned the hard way. If you do it like what you would a traditional landscape or picture where everything's tack sharp, we're shooting it like f11 or up 22, something like that, and just everything's in super, super sharp focus, and we put our subjects in front of that background, we have to shoot with everything completely sharp throughout the entire image. And most of the time that I'm shooting on location, I like to have the background set a mood or a little bit of atmosphere to it, but I don't want it to be the main stage. So I actually want my background slightly out of focus. So this is the trick. We're going to shoot this background out of focus, and we're going to use the natural physics of our lens to determine what our blur is, what that bokeh is going to look like. So elements like this tree that are closer towards the camera are going to be a little bit sharper, more identifiable. And elements way, way off in the back are going to be very, very soft, and we're going to get some beautiful bokeh with that. I'm going to be shooting this at f4 so that I get a very nice subtle blur. You're going to have to experiment. It might be better for you if you're shooting at 5.6 or maybe even f8, or it could look gorgeous if, let's say, you're doing headshots if we're going to be at 3.2 or even 2.8. So your aperture is going to depend on what your scene is, how far away you are. With this distance that I'm at, I'm shooting at f4, and that's producing something quite beautiful. And so when I'm focusing, and we can come up here and kind of look at this and see what's on the back of the camera here. I've got my composition that's here, so I've got my tree that's in the foreground. We get blurry back as we go further back. And so when I'm coming up with what this focus is, I want to, let's actually stick it in manual focus mode. There we go. Look at it and just kind of experiment and see how far you want to go. So if we're coming to the point where we're sharp and in focus, everything's sharp right there, that's too much. I don't want that. So I'm just going to start knocking it out. And I'm coming up here and I'm focusing maybe about 6 feet away. Let's take a shot there. I kind of like that. Let's get one where stuff's a little bit more in focus. And I'm just getting some variety. I can evaluate these when I'm back at the studio looking at it. Let's get one in focus. Okay, that was just for fun. I doubt I'll use that. And we'll come out and get one where we're way, way out of focus. That might be more appropriate for headshots, but I still want it semi-identifiable. So I've got my shots. I've got my background. So now I can take this back to the studio and get it printed up. And when I'm printing this at about 8 foot wide, 8 to 10 foot wide, I can now have a family with this exact same scene that's up there. If I'm photographing a headshot, I can have a telephoto lens, maybe be at 100 millimeters or 150 millimeters, zooming in, and I can select just a portion of this that's going to be the background in there. So I get a lot of diversity when it comes to using the same setting, the same printed background for a lot of different uses. And that's because we're shooting it there. So just a quick recap of everything. We want to make sure that we are locked in at the height that you're going to be photographing it so that we don't have a weird perspective. In my case, it's about 5.5 feet. We want to make sure that we've got our focal length on the lens set up for something that's not super wide and not too zoomed in. It's about 50 millimeters for me. Yours may vary depending on what your shooting space and situation is going to be. And finally, we want to make sure that we are just slightly soft on focus, and that we're doing that with our actual lens and not trying to do that in Photoshop. Because if we do try to blur it in Photoshop, take that sharp photo and blur it, it's going to end up a little bit funky because everything's going to get the same amount of blur to it. And we're not going to get that depth ratio, which I think is so gorgeous and what helps make this a believable combination of our subject in studio and the background. Hopefully this has been helpful to you guys. I had a ton of fun doing it. If you guys want, I can make another video about how to actually set this up in the studio and photograph with this background. Let me know in the comments. All right, bye guys.